Welcome to the podcast. I am hanging out with Marlo Brausse. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks. How are you?
I'm great. I always, not to say that I hate introducing people, but I always get a kick out of introducing people because I've been introduced in the past where the way they describe me, I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I'll explain to people what you're all about, but I'd like to get kind of your opinion on who you are as well. So on my notes, I have Integrative Somatic Therapy Practitioner and Breathwork Facilitator. Beyond that, what are you? Who are you?
What a great question. I'm still in the process of figuring that out. But today, I want to lead with I'm a mom of three. Like my kids are 15, they're 13 and 10. Well, I had to think about that for
15, 13, and 10.
I have been many different versions over the years. If I take it all the way back, I have an applied degree in justice studies from Mount Royal University, graduated in 2004.
Oh, nice.
Worked in the justice system for 10 years, primarily in domestic violence. And the last 5 years, I was an assistant chief probation officer. So what that means is I was working on the judicial system on a whole. Like, how do we improve this system where people are falling through the cracks, where they're not getting the help that they need? So how do I work with other outside agencies to kind of fill those gaps and make sure people are, being held accountable, but also receiving the support that they needed? So that career, 10 years. And during that time, I've always been in love with fitness. I've been a runner since I was 5 years old, running cross country in kindergarten. And I started teaching fitness as a hobby while I was in that career. Yeah. And eventually, when we started having children, I found it really hard to continue working in the justice system. Yeah. Because I felt like each morning I was putting on this suit of armor to go into work. And then coming home after work, I'm trying to take off the suit of armor to be a soft, caring mom. Yeah. And that was really difficult. And at that time, I was, as an assistant chief probation officer, I was managing a couple of offices, one at the courthouse, one in the bail office. And so about 20, 25 staff I had. And gang violence was really on a heightened level in Calgary at that time. Right. And that was our responsibility. And I just felt like this wasn't the place for me. It was too heavy.
Did you... I'm curious about this because did you know that before you had kids that it was something that you weren't going to be able to do for as your entire career? Because when I found when I had kids, so I was on a sort of a different trajectory. I've always been an entrepreneur, but I had a retail store as well as what I do today. But as soon as I had my first kid, it almost was crystallized that I couldn't continue doing what I was doing. And before that, the day before that, I would not have said that. But it was instantly, as soon as I saw my first, I was just like, yeah, I need to change things up. Like, is that what happened to you?
Definitely. Yeah. I did see this as a long-term career. Right. I was kind of climbing the ladder in that role, and there's many aspects that I really enjoyed. And the people that I worked with were incredible people, and I just couldn't sustain it. Yeah. I couldn't sustain the energy that was required to going into. It's very black and white. The criminal code is very black and white. It's like, and I am more creative. Like, how do we incorporate all these different things to help people heal? Right. Because really, ultimately, that's what I was looking to do with that career. I didn't have quite the language that I do now. Like, what do people need in order to make changes in their life? Right. They've gone through traumatic experience. They've made some poor choices. How do we support them to come into a different lifestyle? That's really what I wanted to be able to provide people. Yeah. In the justice system, it's like right or wrong. Yeah. And there's not much opportunity to sway from that. So, and then having children really brought that into light for me.
It's so funny, yeah. And what's interesting about that is it's exactly when you want stability in your life, when all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, yeah, I got to change everything up. Yeah. So what did you do then when you were changing that up? What was kind of the pivot from that career?
Sure. So on my first maternity leave, I took a yoga teacher training program. Nice. And began teaching hot yoga. Loved it. Yeah. And wrote my first business plan to open a yoga studio in Calgary.
Oh, nice.
it was on that mat leave. I went to the Alberta Women's Entrepreneur and asked for financial assistance to get this yoga studio off and running.
Right.
And showed them my business plan. And I remember having so much doubt in myself.
Yeah.
You know, your first business plan.
Totally.
Like, oh my gosh, new mom too. Like, and they approved me for like $200,000.
Holy shit. Good for you.
Yeah, but no. Yes and no. I went home and I remember my mom was looking after our daughter and I'm like, oh my gosh, they approved me to do this. I'm like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Like full imposter syndrome. So I shelved it.
Yeah.
And then during our my second mat leave, their second daughter, I had just enough time back at my government job where I'm like, whoa, something still, like the pain pushes, the vision pulls. Like I could really feel that. And so here I had this business plan, but yoga at that time in Calgary, this was 2011-ish, was starting to pop up everywhere.
Right.
It felt like. So
Yeah.
like the market's saturated in Calgary with yoga studios. So I pivoted that into opening a barre studio.
Okay. So what's barre?
Barre is like a blend of yoga, Pilates, and fitness, really. Like it's, yoga, Pilates, and ballet.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a random third.
Yeah. And I do not have a dance background.
Right.
But I fell in love with this modality because I felt so great doing this style of workout. Like I mentioned, I've been a fitness enthusiast from a really young age.
Right.
So I fell in love with barre when I took it as a participant. And even though I didn't have a background in ballet or dance, I'm like, I really want to create a method that can be brought to people like me who don't have a dance background. So I wanted to make it not intimidating.
Yeah.
I worked with a chiropractor in order to like make sure the movement was functional and safe, and just went for it.
That's awesome. Good for you. Dance, I got to say, like, so there's certain things that I'm curious about. Dance has never been a curiosity of mine at all. I've never understood it as a concept. And I have a daughter that dances, and I'm like, cool, yeah, you can go dance. But it's just never been one of those things. Like, I in terms of how one expresses themselves, I don't understand. You know, it's just like you hear this music and you just see people, you know, moving around. I'm like, my body just doesn't do that. Yoga, on the other hand, is one that I'm kind of leaning into. Do you still practice yoga?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not.
Do you teach?
I don't teach yoga.
Okay.
No. But I still teach a little bit of fitness.
Nice.
And so there's pieces like what I bring into the practice that's similar to yoga is really that mind-body connection.
Right.
And how are we relating to our bodies? What is our mind? How are we interpreting that through the mind? Where's the story? Like those sort of basic principles or foundations of maybe a yoga class. I still really am connected to those.
So potentially a random question, but I'm always curious. When you think of yoga, do you think of it as... I'm always curious what people's entry point into something is, because when we talk about certain activities, I'll talk about it as a physical thing and someone else will talk about it as a spiritual thing or even like a mental thing. When you think of yoga, is it first and foremost, or when you first started doing it, was it a physical activity or was it a spiritual activity?
Definitely physical.
Okay.
Yeah. And I went right into hot yoga.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in probably 2008.
Yeah.
And just fell in love with it.
So what is the appeal to... I'm just learning about yoga now. Yeah. So I'm thinking what's better than hot yoga is nicely air-conditioned room yoga. What's the deal with hot yoga?
I think what I believe, and I was this person, and I don't want to say this wrong, because what is very satisfying is when you're finished a workout and you're standing in your own pool of sweat, there is like this cleared marker of like, I've done something and I can check that off my list because here is the evidence. For me, that's what it was, right?
Okay.
And now when I take a hot yoga class, I feel like I'm more relaxed and I'm just able to open up my body a little bit differently than walking into an air-conditioned room.
Yeah, it's so, because... before I had kind of did the deep dive into yoga, I went to a class with a friend of mine when I was in Edmonton, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I always say that, like, I feel like I'm like if you're imagining like a kid's play and there's always that like dummy on the side that's doing circles and stuff like that and just kind of like looking at his mom and waving and stuff like that. That's kind of what I felt like when I was doing the yoga class. So I didn't know what I was doing, but it was a hot yoga. And to your point, I was like soaking after. I'm like, okay, I don't know what I did, but yeah, I'm soaked. So I'll have to do more of it, because I was just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, if it was nice and air conditioned, that would be better. But I'll look into it. So a mutual friend of ours, Quan, he's who connected us. He had really high praise for you. He said that you've really helped him with his kind of journey and his challenges that he's been going through over the last, however long, say a year or 2 years. So two of the things that you do that I talked about, integrative somatic therapy and breath work. So I want to kind of break those up and talk about them individually, if that's okay, just to get a better understanding of what both of those are. So let's start with integrative somatic therapy. What is that?
Yeah, great question. So integrative somatic therapy is the modality that I'm trained in. Okay. So the woman's name that created it is Rada Chek, and she has a center in Vancouver.
Okay.
So I did training with her for about 2 years. Okay. And 4 different levels of training that I took with her. So integrative somatic therapy, we bring in movement, music, touch, breath work, grounding, resilience enhancement. Those are all components. Mindfulness. Those are all components of, and even dance. Okay. Sometimes. Components of somatic healing or somatic therapy.
Okay. So walk me through what a typical experience, or maybe there's not a typical experience, but if I was to go into that setting, what would I be expecting?
Yeah, I'll just take it back a little bit. So somatic therapy is, is based on the belief that our bodies hold on to traumatic memories or experiences. Okay. So that then disrupts the nervous system. So what we're looking to do in a session is help to find balance, find homeostasis in the nervous system. So we're teaching the body that it's safe to come down from like a heightened or survival state into the parasympathetic rest and digest, and eventually homeostasis. So we want to find that balance point, and we want to just welcome the body in a slow method, so each session looks a little bit different, but that's the ultimate goal.
Is that a group session, or is that an individual session?
Mostly I do that individually.
Okay.
It's somatic therapy. I do group in breathwork. Okay. And we use some body work that is the touch that really does bring the work to a different level. Yeah. But no, the somatic therapy is typically one-on-one.
One-on-one. Mm-hmm. So we were talking, we were doing what I attempted to be a Zoom call, but I'm technologically not the greatest. So, but when we were chatting last week, you were talking about, is it fascia?
Yeah.
Okay. So is this where, maybe talk about that? Because what was interesting is in that same day, you were the second person to have mentioned fascia and how it can retain, I don't know if it's memory or trauma or whatever, but talk about like how through the somatic therapy, you're able to kind of, like, what's the end goal of it, I guess, for someone that's doing it, and how does that process work?
Sure. So I hear a couple of questions in there. So just like what are we trying to achieve?
Yeah.
Right. And then like how is the fascia kind of related?
Yeah.
Like where does that kind of come into play? Mm-hmm. And so yes, many people are familiar with the term "The Body Keeps the Score." It's also a book and a wealth of knowledge into further explaining, how we can go through all of these different experiences in life, and the body sort of holds on to pieces and fragments of those experiences. Okay. So this is times in our life when we've gone through either micro or macro trauma.
Right.
So macro being the life-altering events, the natural disasters, the loss of a loved one, perhaps a divorce or separation, and the micro events, the little t trauma being our everyday stressors. So that could even be driving around on really icy roads for a week straight, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm so tense. Why do I feel that in my hands and my arms? And so in moments of stress or overwhelm or trauma, whichever word you want to use there, we kick into our survival response. So that's the body, the autonomic nervous system is naturally like just able to do that for us, into fight, flight, or freeze. So it kicks us into that response to protect us. Okay. And so in those moments, we don't necessarily need to feel our way through. We just need to move out of harm's way. And so what the body does is it stores onto the memory until we can come back and complete it. So we complete. So what we're looking to do in a session is complete that cycle.
Okay.
And so what that does is when we move, so in a session, we're activating the sympathetic nervous system. So this is our survival response. So we're pendulating and titrating. So we're thinking about or discussing a little bit of the event or the overwhelm that's going on in our life. And so when we talk about it just a little bit, it's not talk therapy, but we're just like, okay, that's interesting. We're noticing, or even the individual is thinking about that event, and their nervous system starts to respond to the thought. Okay. And so then we teach the body how to open up and then come back into rest and digest, into the parasympathetic and homeostasis. So we can feel that overwhelm just a little bit. Yeah. Just a little. So, because if it's too much, it takes us right back into that full-on survival response. Yeah. So we're just feeling it a little bit, and then we're coming back in. So that's where we use the touch. So what we want to do is a little bit of body work to break up the fascia. So the fascia, if you want to, in a very, very basic term, and I hope I don't butcher this, is our body is, like, if we think of like a sausage. Yeah. And the casing. Yeah. Okay, yeah. That's fascia. Okay. The casing. Okay. So that's our entire body has fascia. And so the memory being stored in the body, in the fascia, in the cells, in the tissue. Yeah. So with a little bit of body work, either the participant can apply that themselves, even just you think about like massaging your jaw. Yeah. That is massaging the fascia. We're just like moving some of that energy through. And a lot of us can brace or clench down when we're feeling stress or tension. So that's a great place to start. You start to notice how the sensations feel in the jaw when you apply a little bit of body work there. And so that kind of relates to how we start to get the energy moving through the body. So now we're going to start incorporating some breath. We got a little bit of body work. We're really feeling into what are the sensations that you're noticing? Yeah. And then how do we bring the body back down into that safe place? So the body is always seeking safety. Okay. So we want to make sure that we're creating an environment for people where they can feel safe to connect to their body, to connect to those feelings of a little bit of that overwhelm or stress response, and then find the safety. And so we're teaching people how to do this. I'm teaching people throughout each session how to do this, so that when they find themselves feeling a similar sensations outside of the session, they can apply the techniques that we've practiced together, and that overwhelm doesn't take over their day. Okay. So actually, my wife was asking me about this. Is massage, like you were saying, like you can even just do that yourself, but I'm curious, outside of what you're doing, if someone was to have massage therapy, is that helpful for working with some of this stuff as well? Yeah, absolutely. What I'm trained in is Thai massage. Okay. That goes alongside this. Oh, okay. Yeah, that goes alongside the integrative, like the somatic therapy. And when somebody is, if somebody's releasing this trauma, I'm curious, like how does that kind of manifest? Like what is it that like how is it obvious to you that there's some sort of progression? Like do people like is there like a visual cue that like, hey, this process is happening, or how do you know that there's progress being made? Yeah, that's a great question. Oftentimes there are signs and signals, I'll talk about them, but then there's other times where it's a very like slow and not a lot of movement happening during the session. Yeah. But the person internally is having a huge release or a huge experience for them that's very healing. So it's not always that I can see what the participant is going through. Again, it's not talk therapy. We're listening to the body. So they're having their own journey through the session. Yeah. Well, I'm picturing an exorcism as we're talking. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm picturing like all of this, like this person just getting like all of this stuff out of them, and like this purge of. So anyway, yes. And that's what I don't want to scare people about what somatic therapy is or breathwork is, because that's often what people will associate, the image in their mind of like this intense crying, these really huge purging. So when the neck turns around full 360, then it's like, okay, we're done. Yeah. But the subtle cues that I'm watching for during the session for sure are like tears. Yeah. There's tingling. People will report that's kind of tingling. Sometimes I can sense that as an intuitive. We're all intuitive, but I really do feel into what other people are feeling in the session. And as I'm holding space, I can kind of sense that. But also tremors, shakes, coughing, phlegm, A little bit more movement through any part of their body. And then what we're doing is we're somatic tracking, we're tracking the sensations in the body.
Okay.
So you may come in and I may say, like, where are you noticing any discomfort or tension in your body? And then we may place the hand there. Okay, my shoulder, I'm feeling it there. We'll start to breathe into your hand and we'll start to expand, make that sensation a little bit louder. And now what are you noticing? And you may say, I'm feeling it now in my gut, or I'm feeling it in my left hip. And so then we'll focus on that. So we're tracking the sensation as it moves through the body, what shape it takes. Sometimes people see visions or color. And then what's beautiful is at the end of the session, what people report is that they receive fragmented pieces of memories that they didn't have before.
Okay.
And that may be associated to what was top of mind, what they came into the session kind of looking to repair, or it may be something completely out of left field.
Yeah.
Now, again, I don't want to scare people when I say that.
Like, I didn't want that memory.
Yeah. But the body will only ever release what is needed and necessary for us to heal, for us to ascend into our higher self. So that's what I do trust in that, because I've seen it time and time again, that when these memories come forward, kind of what feels like out of left field, people are have so much gratitude. And what I'm seeing and they're reporting is feelings of gratitude, forgiveness, love, acceptance, just a broader perspective, a deeper understanding, forgiveness. It brings tears to my eyes almost every time.
I love that. So what is a typical, is there, I mean, I feel like the word typical shouldn't even apply to this, but is it something that is an ongoing, like someone's coming in for, in perpetuity? Is it something that you say, okay, I think I can kind of help you in a few sessions? What does that look like from that perspective?
Yeah, great question.
Thank you.
We typically start, I do recommend people start with 3 sessions.
Okay.
And that may be over like a 2-month period. What I like for people, because again, I'm teaching each session. So each session we're working on something a little bit different. I'm teaching you how to learn the sensations of the body. So this is really like, how do we build relation with the body? Yeah. Most of us are so disconnected from ourselves and our body for many different reasons. That might be a whole nother podcast episode. But so really I'm basic, like, how do we learn the sensations of the body? So this is called interoception, or felt sense. So introspection is how do we think about our thoughts? Interoception is like, what are the sensations? How do I feel about what are the sensations that I'm noticing in my body? So during each of those 3 sessions, we're kind of working on something a little bit different, as we're kind of working also alongside what's showing up in your body, which is individual to each person. And then I'm teaching you, these are some of the things that you can build into a routine to use at home. And now I want you to practice that for the 2 or 3 weeks in between session, and practice it when somebody cuts you off on the icy road outside.
Hypothetically.
And then notice what shows up in your body, what's the story associated with it, and then from there we can start to break down what's the patterning that's running behind all of that, because it's usually something that we formed from the age of 0 to 7 that we kind of pick up from modeling or from our parents or caregivers for behavior, and then we are still using that later on in life, and it's no longer serving us.
So, okay, that's an interesting concept. So I'm trying to figure out how that applies kind of in practical, like in day-to-day life. So when you say, so for example, you get cut off in traffic and how you react, is that what you're trying to break? Like, you're trying to break that pattern of when things are happening to you in the world, how you react is going to affect your body. So are you trying to educate people on how to change their reaction, and that will change the effect on the body? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. And that it's like, is it a problem for you in your life? Because if it's not a problem, then that's fine. If you're okay with reacting that way, then that's fine. But if you want to make a change, here's some of the things that we can look at and you can start to incorporate to notice your reaction. So I like to look at, where's the body bracing? What's the impulse? And then what's the story? Yeah.
Because a reaction, I think a lot of people, including myself, like I think over the last few years, I've been really working on the idea that a reaction, I think some people think that it's involuntary, right? And so it's just like, well, yeah, of course I acted that way because that asshole cut me off. So it's like, I'm allowed to act that way. Whereas there's not, that's not the case. Like, your reaction is independent from their action, right? And so like learning that, no, you chose that reaction, even though it was kind of immediate, you can do something different, right?
Yes. And what I started to notice, I'll use myself as an example, is that I would have this reaction come up, and either I would hold it and not do anything with it, and I'd want to do something with it, or sometimes I would do something with it by saying some sharp words or something, and then upon reflection, I'm like, I really didn't want to react that way, and so I would, having a discussion or in a reflection, I would often say to myself, Marlo, that felt really immature. And so then, okay, so that feels immature. So that word to me means it feels a little bit old, feels a little bit underdeveloped. Okay, so when could that response have been formulated? And and really, I'm looking for safety and protection, right? So oftentimes we kind of learn our behavior patterns from seeking love and approval and belonging, and or moving us away from where am I gonna feel shame, pain, or rejection.
Okay.
And so then we start to build these like safety nets around ourselves, as like, how am I going to react to different situations? So if that person cutting me off in traffic makes me feel like I did something wrong, right? Or I'm in the way, or I don't belong here, that makes me feel the shame and rejection. And then so my impulse response or my reaction is coming from that place of a 5-year-old who felt like that on the playground because I got pushed off the slide or the swing or whatever. And I don't know. We don't need to know. This is the beautiful thing about somatic therapy, is that what is going on inside the body is we don't need to know exactly when that memory got stored or what it was in precise, like down to the minute. We don't even need to know in a broader sense. It's just, this is what the body is coming forward and wanting to release in this moment in session. This isn't on the icy roads in Calgary. This is in session, and this is what the body is asking to let go of.
I like that. We were talking last time we were chatting, because one of the ideas that I'm trying to process and think about is, so I was reading a book on meditation over the summer, just to kind of learn, because I meditate, but I don't know what I'm doing, if that makes sense. So like, I'm like, okay, I need to learn how to like sort of properly meditate. So I bought a book to kind of talk about that. And in the book, it was talking about, meditating throughout the day. I don't know what the exact term was, but, not just meditating when you're on the mat, but bringing meditation into your day-to-day life, which I had a hard time understanding how I was supposed to walk around meditating all the time. But I kind of linked this together, and I wanted to ask you and you can tell me if this is not making sense, but I read a book called, so I'm 30 years late, I get it, for anyone who's listening and wants to make fun of me, but it's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I finally broke down and read it. Actually, I'm reading it now. I listened to the audiobook first. And he talks about a stimulus and a response. And there's a space between those two things. And so he would say that that's why you can choose your response, because there is that second or millisecond, but the fact that there's any amount of time means that, and because we're conscious beings, we can consciously extend that time out. And so the stimulus is what someone does to you, and your reaction is how you respond to that. So if you can expand that amount of time in between those two things, in my mind, that is what meditation is. It's expanding. So it's that time between those two things. Because when you're sitting on the mat meditating, your brain's going, oh, I need to go make coffee. I need to go but you're not doing any of those things. So the time of your thought and the time of your action, the gap is the time that you're sitting on the mat meditating. And so in life, if that person cuts you off, and instead of honking your horn and giving them the finger or whatever you want to do, if you sit there for 5 seconds and then honk the horn and then give them the finger, that was 5 seconds of meditation, right? Yeah. And so that was kind of an interesting thing for me, because I have always been one of those people that has thought, well, no, my reaction is involuntary because it's based on that action, right? And so that's the way I'm trying to figure out how I can consciously change my reactions, and it's by just giving myself that time in between the stimulus and the reaction. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I would ask you to look at, like, what is the sensation?
Rage.
And where do you feel, and where do you feel it?
Yeah.
Right? Just so you just notice, you just practice this. Like, what is the sensation? Like, I could give you many examples of myself where I'm like, oh my gosh, there it is. There's that. So what I think of when I think about these types of situations is we all have these like little furnaces or little kind of triggers or little like reactive places in our body that get hit by things externally.
Yes.
And when they get hit, we have a response, right? And so if I can just hold that response, if I can just hold it for a second and just like, what is it? Where is it? How old is it?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if I just do those three things, I can then, it starts to soften because one, it's been seen.
Yeah.
So this is building relationship with our body. So we can think about the relationship as like, okay, imagine a toddler.
Yeah.
That's just like, hey, trying to get your attention. Like, I want to show you that, right? Like, they're so curious and like, I just want to show you everything, experience everything with you. This is the body.
Yeah.
So here we're doing that with the body. Something gets hit, some kind of landmine, some trigger on the body gets hit, and we go, oh, hey, you're trying to tell me something.
Yeah.
Where is it? What is it trying to tell me? We don't have to have this perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then how old is it?
Yeah.
What does it need me to know? And then we can do those things. And then if the reaction's still there, the reaction's still there. And maybe the shame will come in later. Like whatever it is, we just notice how we're operating throughout the day. And then we can start to pull apart some of this programming that's no longer serving.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I think of the mind-body connection, I'm thinking of it as the mind telling the body, and that's the connection, and then the body responding to what. But when you're talking about that, I'm seeing it in reverse, which is actually that's the body trying to express something to the mind, and so it's like the opposite of how I would naturally think of that relationship.
And I think that's most of us until we start to really build that relationship with the body, right? Because we run cognitively, like we need our executive functioning, we need the ego, we need the brain to help keep us on time, on check, meet our goals, like keep lists and be on, and then the body is just along for the ride, right? But it has all these things that it wants to say.
Yeah.
And we can't even sit on our mat because we're like, oh my gosh, I can't sit here with you.
Totally.
The mind is fully in control, and I need to go get that task done.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I was asking you about yoga being, is it a physical thing or is it a mental thing or a spiritual thing? Because my friend who's been helping me get into yoga, he was saying for him it's physical, it's completely physical, and he's never really been able to think of it as a spiritual thing, because he's like, once I'm done, I got shit to do, like I got to go. And I'm like, so if you were to just not do that stuff, then that's when it could become more of a meditative kind of thing, right? Let's talk about I have another question, because you mentioned the ego. I'm one of those, like, it's weird. In school and university, I took a lot of like sociology classes. I have a business degree, but I took a lot of sociology, but I didn't take any psychology or anything like that. So I'm kind of late to the party when I'm learning about these things.
Not at all.
But I've read books on the ego, and it's an interesting thing, because you'll read books like, there's one, I think it's Ryan Holiday, The Ego is the Enemy. And maybe I'll have to reread it, but my takeaway, if I was to try to remember, is that, well, the ego is the enemy. I'm thinking, but the ego has to serve a purpose. Like, it can't be, I can't imagine that the goal is to destroy the ego. So what is the purpose of the ego?
Yeah, it keeps us safe.
Okay.
This is the job that we gave it from a really young age. It's like, how do we scan environments and how do you keep me safe?
Yeah.
What is the appropriate behavior? Remember, am I seeking love and belonging?
Okay.
Or what's going to keep me behavior to avoid shame, pain, and rejection?
Okay.
Right. So the ego is like high functioning, right? Like scanning our environments to make sure that we're safe.
Okay.
And then it's also those things that are like keeping us on time, helping us set goals, how we are in relationships.
Yeah.
So there's really positive aspects to the ego, but there's time, or the voice, or the inner critic, whatever you'd like to call it.
Yeah.
But there's times where it overrides because it doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And so then it makes up stories
Yeah, no, I'm not laughing. I'm like, yes.
Because it like wants to take us to the end. Like it's like, here's the worst case scenario, Marlo.
Yeah.
If you go into this situation, you're going to feel like all these emotions. And remember last time you felt all those emotions and you didn't feel safe and you said that you were never going to do that again. So it's like we're playing this dramatic scene. And I'm like, actually, I've grown past all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm here to learn and grow and experience this in a new way.
Yeah.
So we have to almost remind the ego sometimes that you can relax.
And I like that. I was thinking about this. Actually, I wrote it down in my journal. I had this idea, and again, tell me if I'm way off track, because I'm really enjoying a lot of the ideas that you're talking about here. I was thinking about the ego, and I had this idea, and I had to like write it down as fast as I could so that I wouldn't forget it. But my thought was, when you're young, because again, I'm trying to figure out like what is the purpose of the ego. My thought was, when you're young, your ego is what separates you from other things and other people. So if there's something bad happening, you can say, well, I am this, and that bad thing is that. And so you can separate yourself from that. But I think once you learn as a kid to separate yourself from something, your ego separates yourself from everything. Like it doesn't know when to like, oh, okay, we can go back into the overall energy and just be involved. And so what I was realizing is, you have to consciously talk to your ego, like you said there, almost like where it's just like, no, I want to experience this. Because what I was thinking was, it's good to, if something's bad happening and then you can step back and objectively observe it, then you don't feel like you're a part of that, right? But the problem is if your ego then teaches you to just objectively observe, then even when something good is happening, you're not experiencing it. You're really just observing it happening. And so you're not allowing yourself to like fully be immersed into it, right?
Yeah, so good.
So that's the challenge is, okay, the ego is there to protect you, but when and how do you tell the ego to just shut up sometimes and just chill out?
Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot of inner work. It takes a lot of like, who am I? What do I want from this life? What's working for me? What's not? Like it's about building a relationship with yourself. Again, I'll go back to that, because you're right. The ego likes to put us in boxes. This is the way we do things. This is how we stay safe. This is like what doesn't feel safe outside of this box. And I think we can get carried away with that. We can get way too much in our head, and I think many of us can relate to feeling way too heavy in the head. Yeah. And so how do we come back down to the body? How do we ground into the feet? Yeah. How do we notice what's going on inside there? And I'll be honest, what I noticed that is we can fear the body.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
When those big sensations come up, like the huge rush of sensation and wanting to like hammer onto the horn, or say some sharp words, it can feel like honestly, it can feel like such huge overwhelm. It's just immediate. Like there's no in between time, right? It's like I need to protect myself. Right. And if I don't put the fists up, then I don't have control. Yeah. And so that can be fearful. Yeah. Like those sensations, like on it. Can be so overwhelming that we can fear the body. Right. And so in those cases, it's just like learning what is the sensation. Again, going back to that for anyone that's listening for that practice, like what is the sensation? Where is it? Does it feel immature? Does it feel old? Yeah. How old? Yeah. What is it trying to tell you? Yeah. Do you think that a lot of people, I have a theory on like, a lot of people don't like spending time with themselves. Is it because they don't want to have these conversations with themselves? Like if they keep themselves just constantly stimulated, they never have to have that conversation between mind and body? Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes I don't think that we know that we're doing it when we're in those states, myself included. I'm not going to exclude myself because I've been in those. Yeah. Oh, me those too. States as well. Right. Yeah. And when we get in that heightened state and when our sympathetic nervous system is like reacting to all situations, firing nonstop, where is the next fire that I need to put out? We get stuck in that loop of survival. And so what that looks like is we are in this heightened state all day long. The body starts to like overproduce different hormones to keep us sustained in that state, and coming down into a parasympathetic state or into homeostasis, into that rest state, feels unsafe.
Interesting. Yeah, it's counterintuitive,
Yeah.
right? You'd think it
Yeah.
would be, that would be your safe space,
Yeah.
but
And then
being in that heightened state
Yeah.
becomes your safe space almost.
becomes your safe space because it's like I've got all cylinders firing, and I'm just on to the next. I'm on to the next. Let's go, go, right? Blinders on, and then it gets to a point where the body starts to show up with disease or discomfort, and it starts to show up as impacting our relationships, and we begin to question. I think we all get there, like, what am I doing? What is this worth? Is this working for me anymore?
Yeah.
And some of us get there a lot quicker than others. Some of us use a lot of different coping mechanisms to survive in that state.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, you're right, it's not easy.
No. Yeah.
To sit with yourself.
I picture myself, I'm going to become, as I go through this, I'm going to be that guy talking to myself going down the street the whole time, but in a good way. So let's talk about breath work and I guess how it relates to this, but how it also just, maybe we'll talk about it as a separate practice. One of the things, as I was kind of, learning about, like in the last little while doing yoga and stuff, breathe into your, I didn't even know what that meant. I'm like, how do I breathe into my movement? I don't even know what that means. But what I realized is, and what I'm conscious of is, like when I'm doing yoga, or even when I'm like, if I'm at the gym or whatever, I will actually stop breathing, like when I'm doing things, like, you know what I mean? You're doing something and it's just like, so I'm consciously trying to be like, okay, I want to breathe as I'm doing that. So I guess what is breath work, and how does it, as a practice, what is it, but then how can one apply it to daily life too?
Yeah, great question. The breath has so many medicinal properties. Like, it is something that we all have access to for free.
Yeah.
Every single minute of every single
And
day.
you should take advantage of that.
And we take it for granted. So the breath work, when we use it in like a somatic healing way, or for the purposes of healing, we're kind of I mentioned it a little bit earlier. What we're doing is we're activating that sympathetic nervous system with the breath.
Okay.
So we're breathing in this continuous cycle. So it's called conscious connected breath work, which means you're 100% in control the entire time. People can work with their eyes open or their eyes closed. People can be seated or lying down, whatever makes them feel most safe.
Okay.
And so they're breathing in this kind of circular pattern. And so that extra breath that's going into the body starts to dampen the prefrontal cortex. So this is where the ego kind of lives, that voice, the inner critic. So we start to dampen that. It starts to get a little bit quieter with that extra oxygen or CO2 in the blood.
Okay.
And then we can access the subconscious.
Okay.
So the subconscious or unconscious, however you want to interchange those two words, this is where some of that programming lives. This is where our shadow lives. So the shadow being the aspects of ourselves that we kind of sweep away and hide away from others, because at somewhere along the way we learned that didn't bring us love or acceptance or belonging. And then we start to alter our personality and our behavior and our character to be the person in society that's going to be acceptable and loved. And then we can start to move some of that's no longer working for us and start to repattern the brain. So the breath work, both in somatic therapy and just like one-on-one, like conscious connected breathing, takes us into this trance-like state.
Okay.
So what we call is crossing the threshold. We call moving into the non-ordinary state. So this is where we don't necessarily have words for the unseen. This is a place where we can find tremendous healing. So the method that I'm trained in is called SPIRITUS breathwork, and it has similarities to taking a plant medicine.
Okay.
Without
like mushrooms, you mean?
Without taking any plant medicine. So a lot of people...
can you do both? No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. I've never done any plant medicine, but I know that what I have received from this style of breath work, the healing, the depth of the healing that I've received from it, I don't feel like I need any other.
Yeah. Cool.
So a lot of people find that this is really approachable for them because they are 100% in control. They can come out of it if they need to come out of it, and slow it down if they want to slow it down. Again, I don't want to make this sound intimidating. It's a very slow, gentle process that uses music. We use some of that body work. So we're breaking up the fascia, either the participants applying that to themselves or I'm supporting them with that. And then this integration period at the end where they can connect too. So we're calling in the guides, spirits, guardians, your healing team, your ancestors, calling them into the space to be there in the journey with the person, with the individual, or in a group setting as well. And then you can, in that integration period, connecting with all of that support that's around you and all of that healing energy that's available to you for your highest good of all. It's always for like what needs to move through for the highest good of all.
That's interesting. You mentioned shadows. Are shadows always negative aspects of our personality, or can there be positive shadows?
Yeah, it's the golden shadow.
Okay.
So the golden shadow, I love this question as well. Because you're right, it can be seen as such a negative piece of ourselves. The golden shadow, these are aspects of ourselves that are our gifts, our natural gifts that we're born with, that we often tuck away. So for example, if in school, like imagine a kid who's extremely brilliant, like really smart, is getting 100% on every test, and the other kids in class are like, oh my gosh, look at that person, they're such a nerd, they're always getting acing every test, and they start to feel ostracized or rejected by the group. And so what do? And they stop putting their hand up to answer questions. Yeah. They start like dumbing down some of their tests, or not sharing their results with their peers because of that, because of the shame and the rejection. Another like similar thing could be like a child who has this beautiful voice, this just gift of a voice, and they sing in music class, and all of a sudden everyone starts making fun of them wanting to sing in music class. Yeah. And so then they shut that down. This is like a gift. This is the golden shadow. So those are pieces of ourselves that for some reason was rejected, and we hid it away. Wow. We hid it away. And then when that's reflected back to us, like the world is a mirror, right? And so when we see other people with those gifts shining bright, and we're like, what? How come I thought we weren't supposed to do that. Right? Because it's really like that mirror gets really close, and we're like, how come they're up there on the stage using their voice and singing, and they're not feeling ostracized, they're not feeling ashamed. Right. And so that's where those sort of triggers are where we can start to look inward and like, hey, what is this saying? Like what's asking to be seen there? Yeah. Interesting. So okay, so I have an idea of how they work together. I'm curious if somebody, is listening to this and it's resonating with them, what is kind of what is the entry point into doing something like this? Yeah, most people will come to me with like they'll send me an email or a DM on social media and just like, hey, like I'm feeling, I've like heard of your work, it's resonating with me, or I heard of somatic therapy or breathwork, it's resonating with me. I'm not sure exactly why, but something feels off. And then we'll start with either an intake call to get to know each other and determine whether or not we're a good fit for each other. And if not, I can always refer on to other people, other practitioners. And then from there we go right into a session. So sessions are typically 90 minutes to 2 hours. Okay. Remember, the body moves really slow. Yeah. So when we're just rebuilding that relationship with the body and listening. So that's sort of the entry point. So outside of work, you seem like you'd be, I mean, it seems like something everybody should be working on. So I'd imagine you're busy with work. You mentioned you like to, like you're into fitness, you love to run. What does your life look like outside of work? I'm a mom, 3. Yeah. So quite busy with them. They're all in competitive sports too. Our girls are dancers. Our son is a hockey player. And so we spend a lot of time between those activities. Yeah. We love to ski. Yeah. I love to run. I still run. And I love to read. I love movement. I love being in community. Yeah. And, but it's a little bit more limited with the amount that we spend with our kids' activities. So what motivates you? Like when you think about the work that, so you had a career, you thought it was going to be what you were going to do for the rest of your life. You do this pivot. What motivates you to continue doing what you're doing now? I do. I'm glad you asked this question, because where I was in the justice system and what I'm doing now, the work that I'm doing now was what I had hoped to achieve when I worked in the justice system. Oh, okay. Yeah, I really wanted to be able to help people find repair within, because that ultimately then leads to different decisions in life, right? Like we're going down one path or we're going down another path.
Yeah.
And my entry point into that was like, here's the justice system. This is the hard line. And as a probation officer, what we're doing is we have a bunch of community. I was doing was we have a bunch of community conditions that person then has to follow. And so you're hoping that if they go through counseling, if they maintain steady employment, if they're around like positive peers, if they're cutting out drugs or alcohol, that then they'll make these changes. But when you put those conditions on people, that pushes them into a corner, right? With in a lot of them, a lot less resources. It pulls them away from their community and forces them to make change.
Yeah.
And now what I'm doing with people is people are coming to me voluntarily, and they're like, this isn't working for me in my life, and I'd like to create change. And so that to me feels a lot more sustainable than forcing somebody into a corner to make change. And this is where my passion is helping people to make positive changes in their life. So I did that as a probation officer. I did that as a fitness instructor and boutique studio owner. And now I'm doing that through this different approach through somatic therapy and breathwork. And what it has done for me in my own personal life, I love sharing it with others and hope the same for them.
It seems to me that it's something that you can't. It can't be forced on somebody. Like it's almost like, if someone wants to stop drinking, or if someone wants to, they have to come to that conclusion themselves, right? And then once they do, then it's not to say that it's easy, but I would imagine it's the first step is that they have to want to do this, right?
Yeah, it's a personal relationship with yourself.
And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, and how do you? I guess if going back to your first career, then how would you reconcile those two things? Because if you've done something, you have to, there has to be some sort of punishment or reconciliation or whatever for the act that you've done. But at the same time, you're saying it's black and white. And so by that, it's like, okay, well, you did this, therefore you are this, and you're being punished as a result. When you're changing people in the way that you're doing it now, it's more of a, they're changing themselves, if that makes sense. So it's not just that black and white of I am this, and there's no changing that. It's just like I am this, because I feel like we all get a label, give ourselves a label, and at a certain point in life, for most people, I think there's an unhappiness to like I'm not actually that. And I even said that when I was introducing you, because I just find it funny how I've heard myself be introduced by people, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's not who I feel like I am, right? And so it's through conversation, it's through kind of like reflection that you realize, and you can start articulating who you actually are, right? Yeah.
Well, and just going back to like the labels and stigma that's attached to somebody that's gone through the criminal justice system. Yeah. Then we start to operate from that place, right?
Exactly.
And we start to live life.
Because they're like, that's who I am, therefore that's how I'll act.
Right? And
so how do you reconcile those two things? Because they do need to, there should be some sort of punishment or whatever you want to call it. So justice, I guess. But then how do you also at the same time say, okay, this is what you did. This is how you need to make things right. But that's not who you have to be, if that makes sense, right?
And I think that the intervention needs to start a lot sooner.
Yeah.
So we need to be providing people with access to these tools in high school.
Yeah.
In their teenage years. Like, how do we teach anger management? How do we have people like start to learn the sensations of their body so they don't punch somebody in the face? Right? Yeah. Like it's really basic. It's so basic, this work, but people need access to it. And so if that was implemented into the high school curriculum, then like breath work and body awareness and self-development, we need to be working on prevention. Yeah. And before we get, because I think it's really hard once we get to the stage. Like the victims definitely need some repair, right? Like they need to, it's hard to do, and it's hard to force somebody into this work. Yeah.
And I think you're right. I have 2 kids. You have 3 kids. Letting them know, and so maybe that's where we start, is letting them know at a young age. It's like giving them the permission, I don't know if that's the right word, to express themselves the way that they want to express themselves, and know that they don't have to kind of fit a rigid label, right? Because I think there's that comfort in fitting a label. I am a jock, I am a prep. I am a nerd, like, you know, and just kind of follow that. And it's like, it's okay to kind of be whatever.
Our teenage years are so much about exploration, right?
Yeah.
It's our self-identity. We start to push the boundaries a little bit. We push back against our parents. We push back against our teachers.
Yeah.
And we're starting to look for self-expression.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of shame in those years because like we're exploring our sexuality. We're exploring out different friend groups and we make mistakes because we are pushing and we're learning.
Yeah.
And then there's so much shame, pain, and regret and ostracism and embarrassment that happens in those years. And it's hard to repair that for some people because they've made these huge mistakes and then they don't feel like there's a place to come back from. So how do we teach people like these years are about that?
Yeah. Go
and explore, push the boundaries a little bit, but here are some tools.
Yeah.
To help you through.
I feel like we are worse at, so there used to be, I feel like there was like, you know, if you read books of history, people would be exiled and then people would be brought back from exile. You know, there's this built-in forgiveness in society that I feel like we've kind of gotten away from, where it's just like, you know, if a politician says something and then 5 years later they say something that contradicts it, we're like, we point at it like, well, what, like, it's like we don't allow ourselves to evolve and we don't allow others to evolve and we don't allow us to make mistakes and then be let back into the group or the tribe. And I feel like we need to learn how to do that more.
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this has been awesome. I know I've learned a lot. I really appreciate you explaining that. And like I said, you know, Kwan, he just couldn't say enough about like what you've done to help him. And I know that he's a really interesting guy and he's amazing. On a really exciting journey. So as soon as he mentioned you, I'm like, okay, well, I need to do a dive into this. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care.